Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, a couple of days ago, I went to see the brand new Star Wars film, The Last Jedi. And as you know, if you've already watched my spoiler review of that, I left the theatre with some pretty mixed feelings. However, on thinking even more deeply about this film over the last couple of days and just sort of pondering the plot points and the film itself in a bit more detail, I've actually come to the conclusion that this film is not just something that gives me mixed feelings, but the reason I had mixed feelings leaving the theatre was because it's actually not a very good film, and it has effectively killed the brand new trilogy. And it's really down to the storytelling in particular and the way it's handled. And so what I want to do in this video today is I want to unpack some of the points that perhaps I'll touch on briefly some of the points I talked about in my spoiler review. But in this episode, I want to focus in on some things I didn't talk about and that I've been thinking about the last couple of days, which really, to me, seal the deal and make this not a good film, and are the reasons why I think they've killed the trilogy. And also, I want to finish by suggesting how I think the trilogy could have been fixed, what they could have done better to actually make a brand new trilogy which was far more satisfying. And I don't mean satisfying for die-hard Star Wars fans or people like me who were fans of the original trilogy and were around for that, but I mean for any audience in general who is experiencing this new Star Wars trilogy. So it's about good storytelling. It's not about nostalgia. It's not about satisfying some fanboy demand. It's about telling good stories. That's my concern. And this new trilogy doesn't really do that. So first of all, I'm not going to go into great detail about this. I've already mentioned it, but there's no doubt this film was loaded with all sorts of political messaging, and that was one of its problems, I think. It just was look, I wouldn't be surprised at all, thinking more about some of the sort of the political subtext of this film, that I wouldn't be surprised in actual fact if there was just far too much of the current American political climate which had a bearing on the way this film was written. There's more and more, as I've thought about it in the last couple of days, that was in this film that does seem a little bit too much like political commentary about current American politics. I'm not going to go into all the details. Maybe that's a video in and of itself. Oh, look, I could be totally wrong. It might just be pure coincidence. But based on the fact that just a couple of months ago, people were running around claiming that the Rebel Alliance was a symbol of the anti-Trump movement, I wouldn't be surprised to find that they've actually loaded up some of that or those connotations into this new film, and it is detrimental. But I want to talk today about some of the bigger things, not because you could still make a movie with political propaganda in it that people disagree with, or that people find annoying and frustrating, and still the storytelling is good. The rest of the storytelling is so good that you actually still have a reasonably enjoyable movie experience. It's just one of those little things you go, oh, I wish they hadn't done that. But there are some bigger problems with this story and this film, and so let's look at some of those bigger points. First of all, The Last Jedi destroys the concept of self-sacrifice. Now, self-sacrifice is at the heart of true heroism. It's the essential element of heroism. The hero is the person who is so committed to truth, to goodness, is so committed to loving their friends, to loving what is good, true, and beautiful, that they are actually willing to die in order to protect and defend, or out of love of what is good, true, and beautiful. And I don't mean in a weird kind of, violent religious martyrdom, but I mean in a genuine, if they have to give of themselves to save people, they will do that, right? That's the heart of true heroism. It's the heart of the hero's journey. Every story since the beginning of time about heroes, self-sacrifice has to be an essential element. If it's not there, you don't have a good heroic story. It is also a central tenet of Star Wars. It's been there right from the very beginning. In that very first film, when Obi-Wan Kenobi sacrifices himself, and then eventually Han Solo sacrifices his own ego and his pride and his desire for what he wants and comes back. And that self-sacrifice is just central to what Star Wars is. It was the whole focus of the hero's journey. That has all been killed, though, in The Last Jedi. Just think about it. That scene with Finn and Rose in the final battle, where Finn is heading 1,000,000 miles an hour, hurtling towards that big laser cannon battering ram from the First Order, and he is trying to destroy it. And his plan is, I'm going to fly right into the heart of it, and I will destroy it. I will sacrifice myself in order to save my friends, in order to save what is good, true, and beautiful, the Resistance, right? That's what he's doing. And interesting enough, I thought that was actually going to happen. I thought there was going to be a real payoff there. And I was like, oh, wow, at last, he's actually going to die. There's going to be a real payoff. There's going to be a real cost. There's going to actually be a bit of weight in this story. They're actually going to go a bit deeper. And then all of a sudden, at the last second, Rose comes in and uses her speeder/ship to knock him, smash him off course. She crashes into him to deliberately stop him from sacrificing himself. Now, there's no indication, that's certainly not set up like Finn is like an angry lunatic and like he's like Kylo Ren and he's so obsessed with killing people or maiming people that that's what his fixation is. There's nothing like that at all. It genuinely plays out like a moment of self-sacrifice that is interrupted by this Rose character. And then she has this absurd line where after they've crashed and he pulls her out of the ship, she says, something about, we don't fight against what we hate. We fight for what we love, or it was something, I can't remember the exact line. And to me, when I heard that line, I was like, what are you saying? This doesn't make any sense. He was fighting for what was true, good, and beautiful, and he was fighting out of love of friends and love of what is true. That's what he was doing. He was just willing to sacrifice himself for that. And that's actually what heroes are supposed to do. And this film kills that and gives us this lecture about how that's not a good thing. When she delivered that line, honestly, I really felt like she should have been saying, silly, we don't do that. It was like so patronizing and condescending as a concept. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is exactly what heroism is all about. And here is the big problem with that moment of the script. This moment where Rose lectures Finn about how we don't sacrifice ourselves for the greater good comes what? Just moments after Vice Admiral Holdo sacrifices herself for the greater good. She turns the rebel ship towards the First Order attack ship and she flies through it at light speed and kills herself in the process, sacrifices herself, it's an act of self-sacrifice, to save the Rebel Alliance, the rebels who are left behind her. To stop the bad guys, save the good guys. That's what heroes are supposed to do. Now, when Finn tries to do the exact same thing, and there's no indication that it won't work by him flying in. I never got that sense out of the film that it was pointless. It indicated if he did that he would have stopped the battering ram and would have saved his friends. But when Finn tries to do it, all of a sudden he gets stopped and we get this completely opposite message. Oh, no, that's not what we do. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We just saw you do that a few moments ago. We have Luke Skywalker when he turns up at the end to fight that battle. There's no sacrifice. And I think part of it was maybe they realised, well, we can't have Luke turning up now to battle Kylo Ren and then doing an Obi-Wan Kenobi and sacrificing himself, take me. We can't do that because we've just had Finn being lectured about how we don't do that kind of thing. So I know, let's have Luke turn up as a Force ghost. And so there's no sacrifice. So there's never any risk to Luke Skywalker. And his death at the end of that battle, which was a pretty amazing concept, was a Force ghost, the end of that battle with Kylo Ren, where he dies, it's not really a battle, but that encounter with Kylo Ren where he just goes off into the Force, it's portrayed as him choosing to ascend. It's not portrayed as if he had to sacrifice himself for that moment of Force power. And so there's no sacrifice there. Luke Skywalker's encounter with Kylo Ren doesn't mean anything because Kylo Ren can't kill him. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't kill him because Luke Skywalker's not there to kill. So there's no point. There's no cost involved to him. And then when you have that whole thing with the Jedi tree burning and Yoda burning down the Jedi tree, we'll talk more about that in a minute. There's a scene at the end of the film where it looks like those Jedi books are actually on board the Millennium Falcon. So what was the point of sacrificing this tree and sacrificing all these old documents if they're not even really being sacrificed? Basically, there's lots of ways in which this film has effectively killed the concept of self-sacrifice. Now, the problem with that is you no longer have a hero's journey without self-sacrifice. There can't be anything heroic going on here. Now, on top of that, the movie is riddled with contradictions in the storytelling. I've mentioned already the whole issue around Holdo, Vice Admiral Holdo and her self-sacrifice, and yet we're told that when it comes to Finn and Rose, that no, self-sacrifice is not the thing we do. Not only that, Holdo does feel a little bit contradictory as a character. She doesn't really feel like a general. I don't know, she just doesn't feel like a battle-hardened general. I mean, that's maybe give or take. But the whole thing with Poe, and the way in which they try to play him as a character who doesn't take orders from females and he's this stroppy male who thinks he has to be in charge because he's got this latent sexism in there, yet another political message, because of the way in which she interacts with Vice Admiral Holdo. But think about this for a second. This is a total contradiction. We are talking about the same Poe who is more than happy to serve under under Princess Leia. So why does he now all of a sudden have this issue that he's got a problem with females? To me, that's totally contradictory to what they've already established in this trilogy. The whole thing of Snoke bringing Rey. Remember, he tricks Rey and Kylo Ren, that Force visions, and that are so powerful they're actually with each other. That's all Snoke, remember? He tells us he did all that. And why did he do it? So he could trick Rey into coming to Snoke, so that Snoke could extract what? Information about where Luke was. But here's the point. Why does he need to bring Rey all the way to him to do that when he's already with her, present on the very planet where Luke Skywalker is? And Kylo Ren actually saw Skywalker and knows that Skywalker is there. So what is the point of that? It is just totally contradictory. There was no need for that. And another thing that really frustrated me, why, at the very beginning of the film, why are there no shields on a dreadnought? The whole thing about the dreadnought was once you've destroyed those surface cannons, it is now totally vulnerable to bombers. You can destroy the ship. All you have to do is destroy the surface cannons. In fact, it only takes one fighter to do it. Why are there no shields? The whole concept of shields is well established in the Star Wars universe, in the Star Wars mythology, and now we've got the greatest, or one of the greatest battle weapons outside of the Death Star that's ever been introduced into the Star Wars franchise, and it doesn't have shields. There's all these contradictions. The storytelling is not good, and maybe they were just hoping we wouldn't notice. But as I said, the more I've thought about it, the more I've realised this isn't good storytelling. The Last Jedi also kills some potentially good, or in fact potentially great, storylines, plot lines that were set up in The Force Awakens. It just kills them dead in their tracks in the most unsatisfying, and I would call it wasteful, from a storytelling perspective, wasteful ways possible. Think about some of these. Snoke. We don't know anything about Snoke. He's the most pointless villain probably that we've ever seen in Star Wars. Even the prequels had villains who meant something more, had more established villainy than what Snoke does. Snoke is pointless. They set him up in the first film as this great evil menace. We never ever get the sense of his menace in the second film, and then he's quickly dispatched with. Captain Phasma, again, she could have had potential, and this film could have really taken Captain Phasma to that next level. They just quickly kill her. Hux. In the first film, Hux is the serious Nazi-like character, and it's interesting because that's very much is drawing from the mythology and what Lucas did with the original films. The whole point of the Empire with their crisp military uniforms and jackboots was they were supposed to invoke this idea of Nazism. And Hux is the perfect Gestapo SS man. That's what he is. And he's set up that way in the first film, and there's this rivalry between him and Ren, and he's an interesting character, right? But in this film, what we have with Hux is a bumbling idiot. He is the snivelling wretch of a character who doesn't even belong in the First Order when you think about it. And they have this absurd ex machina, this Deus ex machina moment where Snoke, I think they realised how pointless he was. So Snoke gives Kylo Ren this advice, it's always good to keep a snivelling wretch around. It's like, oh, well, I guess that makes it okay then. But he is ruined. He should have been this super Nazi. He should have been someone who was probably actively plotting against Kylo Ren because he's so self-interested and so committed to the ideology. But instead, he's just this bumbling idiot who is, I would say he's kind of more like, he really is more like a Mel Brooks comedic Nazi. Hey, how about Savoy, Uncle Hitler? That's what we've got going on instead of what he's established as. They just destroy all that. Rey's parents. Now, Rey's parents are set up, and her parentage is set up as this important mystery in the first film, and I thought was a great potential plot point. And according to this film, her parents, they're nobodies. There's no meaning or context or anything that matters at all about her parents. Now, by the way, if it turns out they're just trying to trick us, and in the next film we're going to find out, no, she really is somebody important, and she does have an amazing parental lineage, then it will be the most unfulfilling and unsatisfying and totally unsurprising reveal in movie history, because everyone will be like, yeah, well, duh, you didn't set that up very well, okay? If they wanted to do that, it would have been best just to leave her parents unresolved. But according to this film, and it does sound like her parents are just nobodies, that plot point is just killed dead. The First Order is a farce. The First Order is set up in The Force Awakens as this menace and this evil threat and this very serious threat. And the only reason they are defeated is because of a weakness in their system that the rebels are able to discover and to exploit. But it really is a sort of chance exploitation. It's not like they're not outmatched by the Rebel Alliance. They're not weak. They're not vulnerable. Yet by this film here, what we have is a First Order that really does. Not only do they struggle to actually beat the Rebel Alliance, but all you have to do is just simply keep ahead of them, keep moving your ship slowly ahead of them, and basically you can, it's like watching two turtles chasing each other. It's like, what is this? There's no threat here with this villain, and this, they are supposed to be the arch villains. They're supposed to be the all-powerful menace, and yet all you need to do is just slowly either move away from them, or if you distract them in the simplest ways, then guess what? You can actually outmatch them. You can best them, even though you are totally ill-equipped for that. So what you have here is this classic situation with these super arch villains, the super evil force, who they've become a farce in this film, and that effectively kills all sense of menace in this trilogy. It's totally gone. Not only that, but that comedy that they had at the beginning with Hux and Poe Dameron, the whole hold, this is a call for General Hux, please hold, that Marvel comedy, that really undermined, I think, the whole menace of the First Order again. By inserting things like that into the movie, they have basically killed any menace that the First Order could have had in this trilogy. Another problem is that Rey is now even more of a Mary Sue than what she was in the previous film. Now, in the previous film, she was a Mary Sue because she could do all these amazing things, fly ships, fly with great proficiency in battle. She could use the Force powers. She could use a lightsaber against Kylo Ren, the arch nemesis, and all of this without any training whatsoever, any learning curve. And so she was a Mary Sue. She doesn't have character development. She doesn't learn these things. She's just been given all these qualities. And I think possibly part of it was they were so desperate to have a strong female character that they just sort of loaded her up, No assembly required. She's all ready to go. Now, we could forgive that, though, because there was this theory that, hey, and they set this up, certainly the possibility that her parental lineage was really mattered here. And so the whole thinking was, maybe the reason she's a Mary Sue and she's got all these amazing powers and abilities is because she is actually an amazing Force user, because she's related, she's the daughter or the granddaughter of somebody important. Maybe she's a Skywalker, maybe she's a Kenobi, and that's why. There were people even proposing maybe she was a reincarnation of Anakin Skywalker, right? There were these possibilities about why this might happen. However, in this film, they've killed all that. They've told us that her parents were nobodies. So what that means is that Rey was literally nothing more than a sweatshop worker on this planet. Her parents were nobodies, and yet without any training whatsoever, or very, very little training, and certainly very minimal encounter with experienced Jedis, she has become the most powerful Jedi and probably the most important person in the galaxy now. This doesn't make any sense. This just doesn't make any sense. She has become even more of a Mary Sue now. So basically she had these Mary Sue characteristics in the first film, but there was it needed an explanation, right? Now, because of The Last Jedi, all of these things that she can do, now that it totally defies explanation. So it's gone from being something that required an explanation to something that totally defies all explanations. Another problem with the film was the whole Codebreaker casino subplot. There was no need for it. It was a distraction. It was very politically loaded, and it was just pointless. It was absolutely pointless. And it's a real warning sign when you've got things going on like that in a film, which is supposed to be a good, tight, well-controlled story. Like if this wasn't Star Wars and that happened, let's say it was a Transformers movie where something like that happened, critics and everyone else with half a brain would rightly be saying, hey, that's bad storytelling. But what's happening is people are either pretending it didn't exist and saying, no, this is the greatest movie ever, or there are people who do acknowledge it, but they say, oh, well, it wasn't the greatest, or I wish it wasn't in there, but it's forgivable. Like I said, if any other movie did this that didn't have Star Wars stuck on the side of it, then I guarantee you people would not be as forgiving. And the reason they wouldn't be as forgiving and shouldn't be as forgiving was because it was a pointless subplot. There were far better ways of achieving what they wanted to achieve. This wasn't good storytelling. As I said in my previous review, another issue is the fact that the Star Wars mythology is now dead. We had the whole burning of the tree. Yes, I know there's that indication that maybe Rey has kept the books, but certainly the film and the way in which Yoda, the ultimate Jedi Master, has portrayed it, and the way in which that interaction happens with Luke, is that the Jedi religion is dead. The old texts, the old documents, they don't mean anything. It's all what's in your heart. The problem with that is that doesn't make any sense. That's not Jedi mythology. It's totally inconsistent with the whole Star Wars mythology. In fact, what you were describing there, follow your feelings, follow what's in your heart, that is what the problem with the Sith is. The Sith are driven by their feelings and their passions. And effectively now they have set up in this new trilogy a new version of the Jedis who were not driven by their passions, who are now actually supposed to be trusting their heart. Well, that's just completely contradictory, like I said, and they have effectively killed the Jedi mythology. They've effectively killed the Star Wars mythology by doing that. Another issue is the relationship between Kylo Ren and his parents, between Han Solo and Princess Leia. They keep trading in on this relationship. It's actually quite a pivotal part of the plot when you think about it. It's sort of this very important either subtext, or in The Force Awakens it's very much out front there. It's an important reveal. Now, and they keep going back to it, and it is sort of central to all of the things that are unfolding around us. But here's the point. It doesn't carry any weight for us as an audience because we've never seen the relationship between Kylo Ren and his parents. We saw a brief encounter after he had become a Dark Sith Lord and he killed his dad. But there's no sense of depth there. We have never seen them relate as father and son, as mother and son, as mother, father, son, as a family together in happy times before he converted to the dark side. And yet they keep trading in on this whole relationship as a central aspect and element of this new trilogy, and yet it doesn't mean anything to us as an audience because we've never seen that relationship. They didn't establish it, basically, and now they are trying to reap the rewards. It's like going to a bank and drawing out money even though you've never deposited money into that bank, right? It's robbery. It's storytelling robbery. So what they're doing is they're trying to withdraw money to pay for this really important and deep and meaningful relationship and parental, son, father, son, mother, son struggle with Kylo Ren and his parents, but they've never established that. They haven't made the deposit. They're just trying to draw out all the cash. Basically, I would suggest to you that with this new trilogy, we are now in the same place with this trilogy as what we were with the prequels when they were at a similar time when they were first released. So we had the second film now in the trilogy. Now, please understand, the prequels, I think, were, as far as storytelling goes, they were a lot more messed up. The new trilogy is better than the prequels. There's not that level of badness. However, there are some serious problems here that have effectively killed this new trilogy. It's dead. The problem is we're at that point now, just like we were with the prequels, where people, the majority of people haven't figured that out yet. People are still trying to justify to themselves, just like we all did. I was guilty of this with the prequels. Why? No, trust us. It's good. And then a couple of years later, after the final film had been released, and a couple of years after that, we all suddenly realized, or it slowly started to dawn on us, no, these were not good films at all because the storytelling was so subpar. This was not a good trilogy. And the same thing is happening right now with this new trilogy, I'd argue, and we're at that same phase we were with the prequels where most people are in denial. All the critics are raving about it. They're not talking honestly about it. It will take a few more years yet before we actually start admitting that there's a problem here. And I think two big problems have really come together at once to create the perfect storm here as to why this trilogy has now been killed, in particular by this movie, why the trilogy is I think it's dead. Because think about it, even if there's no real suspense now, like Empire Strikes Back, it's set up, there was suspense, and it left you on a cliffhanger, and it set up that final film, and you were waiting. When you walked out of Empire, you wanted to see what was coming next. Do you really want to see what's coming next? I don't think most people do. Even if you're a diehard fan of this film and think, oh, it was the greatest Star Wars movie ever. There's no cliffhanger here. There's no intense, I wonder what's going to happen next. I think for most people it's kind of like, well, even if I enjoyed the film or I thought it was okay, it's just, there's nothing really interesting that says to me, hey, come back for the third and final film. It's going to be awesome. Effectively, it's such a mess, these two films together. The trilogy now is such a mess, I think, that they've killed the chance to actually conclude it in a really meaningful and enjoyable way, and I mean from a storytelling perspective. Now, the reason that's happened is two things have come together at once. First of all, the new big studio money-making, formulaic money-making machine. This whole idea, we've got to make formulaic movies, we've got to make money out of it, just sell toys, we've got to sell shirts, we've got to market the product. And I think so that's happening. The new Star Wars movies are being made at a time when that is the dominant force in cinematic filmmaking, is the big studio and their control of the product. And instead of treating it like a piece of art, they treat it like a product that is an economic unit that's there to make the money, and that's their primary concern. And ironically, it's actually the first Star Wars movie that set that whole train in motion, probably, and was certainly, I mean, it was always there, but it really amplified that problem. And so, interestingly, this new Star Wars trilogy might be a victim of its own original Star Wars trilogy, and the way in which the whole idea of merchandising and money making and this whole idea of what a movie could be as an economic unit really came to the fore. But the point is that's happening, and at the same time, we have a lot more politicization of storytelling going on. And instead of telling good stories, we just tend to politicize everything now, including our storytelling. And I think this movie suffers from that. Now, think about even something like House of Cards, which is all about politics. But it's not interesting to you because it's about politics. What's interesting to you about House of Cards is because it has some consistent and universal storytelling principles, some consistent and universal things about the human experience, about the struggle between good and evil, about the struggle between temptation to the light and temptation to the dark, about choosing virtue or choosing vice, right? That's what House of Cards is all about. It just happens to be in a political context. So even though it's a political story, it's not politicized. But this new Star Wars film suffers from the politicization of storytelling, and there's very much our politics have to dictate how we tell our stories. Instead of saying these universal principles and truths about the human experience and what it is, the deeper things that really touch us in here and in here, instead of using those as the guide to telling stories, we now use our political ideologies and we say they must dictate how our stories are told. And so you've got these two things that have come together at once, and they create a perfect storm, and the new Star Wars trilogy has fallen victim to it. We've got to make lots of money. We've got to have a product. We've got to have a formula. We've got to stick some nostalgia in, stick an R2-D2 in. Yeah, we need that. You know what? Add 2 pinches of this and 1 pinch of that, mix it all together, and you got money, 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 right? And you've got that going on at the same time as you've got, you know what? We've got to have our ideology dictating how we tell our story. Got to have a female lead. She's got to be empowered. No, you can't have character development because that'll make her look weak, and we can't make females look weak because that's bad and that's wrong. And we've got to have diversity, and all of these political things are overriding good storytelling. And so as a result, this trilogy in many ways has come along, the creation of this trilogy is happening at probably the worst possible moment. And so it's now dead. But here's the thing. I think this could have actually been a great trilogy. And here's how I think they could have fixed it. They shouldn't have focused on Rey in the first film. I actually think this probably should have been Kylo Ren's story, not Rey's story. Now, I know that doesn't suit the ideology. Oh, but Brendan, we've got to have a strong female lead. Don't panic. If your ideology is getting in the way of good storytelling, then get rid of your ideology. Don't sacrifice the story. And that's what they've done in this film. But here's the good news. You can still have Rey as the main heroine of this brand new trilogy, but you don't start with Rey. That's the mistake they made. And what I think they should have done was established Kylo Ren better as a character and established him before the fall to the dark side. And here's how I would have done it. And I would have got rid of very quickly in that first film, The Force Awakens, I would have got rid of Han Solo, I would have got rid of Luke Skywalker, and I would have got rid of Princess Leia. Just have them very briefly in the film and then move the story forward. And that would have served the storytelling a lot better. Now they're stuck in this situation with Princess Leia where tragically Carrie Fisher has died. So, yet Princess Leia is still alive. So how are they going to conclude her story in a satisfying way in the next film? They're either going to have her dying off screen, which I think will be very unsatisfying, or they're going to have some CGI version of her, which will also be very unsatisfying. I think that what happened was they kept her around too long. So here's how I think they should have fixed the problems. The first film in the trilogy should have focused on Kylo Ren, and it should have featured Kylo Ren before he had turned to the dark side. And basically what you should have had was this whole thing with his mother. He was very much present with his mother, and he was being trained by Luke. And what happens though is Princess Leia dies. She's either killed in battle or she dies of old age, but she dies very early on in that first film. She dies. And so this creates turmoil because Han Solo, he's gone off, he's left the family, he's doing his smuggling thing because he just can't help himself. And so he's forced basically to come back to the family home and to effectively all of a sudden try and pick up with Kylo Ren where he left off. But he's not very good at it. And so there's this dysfunctional father-son relationship between Han and Kylo Ren. And Han tries to convince Kylo Ren that it's all going to be okay. And he says, look, it's all fine. It'll work out fine. And then basically Han Solo is killed. And he's killed in such a way that makes Kylo Ren doubt that everything does work out okay in the end. He should look at this moment and think, well, my mother's dead, and now my father's died in a way that doesn't make sense after he's just finished telling me that everything will be okay in the end. Well, it wasn't very well, didn't turn out okay for him. And so basically he's now conflicted and he has no parents. And here's the thing, he's now being trained by Luke, but Luke is really struggling with Kylo, who is now becoming vulnerable to doubts, disillusionment, and despair. He's starting to fall into all those behaviors that would lead him to the dark side. But he's still not finished yet. He's got Luke, right? But then Luke is killed. Somehow Luke dies. And so now what you have is this powerful Skywalker, who's the last Skywalker left in the galaxy, who has been partially trained and who is totally conflicted and is caught up in all this grief. And he has basically no direction. And he is now prime for none other than Snoke, this evil Sith Lord who now has found a perfect apprentice that he can turn to the dark side and use for his nefarious purposes. And so this is how Kylo Ren gets turned. And we focus on this whole thing. We establish this relationship with his parents, and so now it has meaning. Then in the second film, what you do is you introduce Rey. And in the second film, Rey can be this young girl who is on this planet, and she's a slave, and she has no parents. What we're doing here is we're setting up a black and a white. The black is Kylo Ren. He's the bad guy. He's the evil villain. He's got no parents. He's got conflict because he's got no parents. What have we got on this side? Rey. She's the light side, right? She's the white. She's got no parents. She's conflicted, but she chooses a different path. And basically what happens is that somehow she's trained as a Jedi. Maybe what you could have is, in the previous film, rather than Luke Skywalker dying, there is that whole conflict between Luke and Kylo Ren that plays out, and that mistaken identity about what actually happened. And so Kylo Ren leaves with his followers, or whatever the case may be, and then Luke Skywalker ends up having to train Rey in the second film. But I think ideally Luke should probably die in that first film, and then in the second movie perhaps you could have him come back as a Force ghost, or have someone else. There is perhaps someone else who knows the Jedi ways, or perhaps Rey has discovered a whole lot of old Jedi books that were on one of those ships she was scavenging. And so she starts learning and teaching herself. And here's the thing, she does actually have some important lineage. I don't know what that would be. I haven't really thought too much about the story, but she does have some Jedi blood in her. And so that's why she is interested in this. And that's why she is actually able to effectively start training herself and start learning. And she might encounter in that second film different people who are perhaps who knew Jedis or who knew of the Force, but even if they weren't Jedis, and they slowly add to her training. And so she's not this perfect Jedi. She's not a Mary Sue. She has to struggle. But the second film is all about her struggle. And what happens as well in the second film, in the meantime, is this, that Kylo Ren, basically the Resistance is now splintered because all of the key people to the Resistance are dead. Luke Skywalker is dead. Han Solo is dead. Princess Leia is dead. The key core leadership team for the Resistance is dead. And everyone is disillusioned and the Resistance breaks apart from a group of probably young and loyal fighting military forces who are ideologically, they're like ideologues, they are ideologically committed to the concept of the Skywalker name. And so Kylo Ren is the only Skywalker as far as they know, and so they are willing to follow him, and they effectively become the dark, menacing, evil army in the universe. And they pick up the remnants of the Empire. Maybe the First Order is just a remnant of these Empire troops, and they form this massive force that actually becomes a serious menace again in the galaxy. And so the Resistance is dead, it's all scattered, but those who are loyal are ideologically committed, and so they are a real danger because they cannot be persuaded by logical reason. And then in the third and final film, what you've got, I would make it several years later. So do what they did with the original films, and you give yourself some time breaks between the movies, or enough time to develop things. And so what you have is you end up with a situation where this final film, there's a gap of some years between the second and third film, and when we meet them again now, Rey is a proficient and trained Jedi, and she has attracted her own resistance force, this new resistance effectively, of people who recognize the threat of the new dark side and the new this new evil galactic force that wants to take over the galaxy. And they recognise the threat of Kylo Ren, and she is a lot more well-trained now. But obviously, she's not a super Jedi. And the final film is about the final battle between these two armies and Kylo Ren versus Rey. That's the key battle, right? They sort of are the consummate sort of archetypes of this battle that's played out. And so what you've got is this guy who's a powerful, evil villain who's been well-trained versus a self-trained, self-made Jedi who could be beaten. And so there's uncertainty, there's tension, there's dramatic tension there. That would be, I think, an interesting trilogy, and I think that's how you could have fixed it and how you could have done it better. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, unfortunately, because as I said, there's a whole lot of issues here, and really, I think for me, The Last Jedi has now killed this trilogy. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, so please let me know in the comment section below what you think. And please, please, please don't forget a huge thank you to, there's a couple of people who have signed on board to become supporters of the content I'm producing on Patreon. If you like the content and you want to see more of it, I'd love to be able to produce more. It really is just a funding and time issue. If you want to support it, you think it's worth supporting, chuck in $1 or $2 here or there. That's all I ask. And I will do my best to produce more of this content so that you have more enjoyable content to watch. The link for my Patreon is below in the description, and it's also on screen now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.